Blair's book tour is not going as planned. In Dublin, protesters hurled eggs and shoes, angry that Mr. Blair took his country to war in Iraq and that 7 years later he remains unapologetic.
How can you not feel sorry about people who have died? I mean, you would be inhuman if you didn't think that. But when I'm asked whether I regret the decision, you know, I have to say I take responsibility for it, but I can't regret the decision.
Threats of more protests prompted Mr. Blair to cancel a London book signing and launch party. On the day they were scheduled, lone protester John Howsam said the former Prime Minister has few fans here in Britain.
He's responsible for the deaths of a lot of people by telling lies.
Anthony Selden wrote 2 books on Mr. Blair. He says the former leader will not be surprised by the public anger over Iraq.
I think he'll be disappointed because I think he was hoping that, in a way, the book would put a rest to the kind of anger that there has been about the conduct of the war in Iraq, but not surprised, no.
Mr. Blair is donating all the proceeds of his book to a military charity. That includes a multi-million-dollar advance. His memoirs jumped to the top of bestseller lists in Britain despite the debate over Iraq. Gary McCarthy is one of those who bought it.
He had quite an interesting role in the Northern Ireland peace process. And I saw him on the TV and it looked like an interesting read.
Mr. Blair led Britain for a decade, not only presiding over the war in Iraq, but also guiding the country after Princess Diana's death and securing peace in Northern Ireland. He is now an envoy for the Middle East.
We've never had a Prime Minister like this who has stood down from office and wanted to have such a far-seeing role.
Selden says Mr. Blair was very much in tune with ordinary people, but his critics mocked him as President Bush's poodle, and he is now considered more popular abroad than here in Britain. Retired British Major General Tim Cross, who is Britain's senior representative in Iraq just after the invasion, thinks Mr. Blair did the right thing in Iraq.
I think in the short term he is suffering, but my own view is that in 15, 20, 25 years' time history will teach him quite well.
That will depend on whether Iraq stabilizes. As that country struggles 7 years after the invasion, some analysts here are concerned that Mr. Blair is now speaking aggressively about Iran.
Do you allow those people to get hold of a nuclear weapon or not? Now, my answer to that is no.
So
if you were sitting in that seat, you'd have to take that decision too.
To some, he is a war criminal. To others, a great British leader. Tony Blair's memoirs have done little to resolve his complex legacy. Jennifer Glass for VOA News, London.
Saddam Hussein and weapons of mass destruction, chemical, biological, potentially nuclear weapons capable.